When marketing executive Sarah Chen defended the janitor from her boss's cruel insults, she had no idea she was risking her career for one of the richest men in America. What happened next didn't just change her life. It exposed the true character of everyone in that building. Sarah Chen had a routine that most of her colleagues found strange. Every morning at 7:45, when she arrived at the sleek Manhattan office building that housed Sterling and Associates Advertising, she stopped to talk to the janitor. "Good morning, Mr. James," she'd say, her smile genuine and warm. Most people walked right past him. He was part of the building's background, as invisible as the marble floors he mopped or the windows he cleaned. Security guards, executives, assistants, they all looked through him as if he didn't exist. But Sarah saw him. She'd learned that his full name was James, that he'd worked as a janitor for different companies for years, that he had a quiet dignity despite the way people treated him. He was probably in his 50s, though it was hard to tell. He had kind eyes and calloused hands and a way of listening that made you feel heard. Sarah often brought an extra coffee from the shop downstairs. "Thought you might want," she'd say, handing it to him. They'd chat for a few minutes about the weather, about the news, about life. Nothing profound. Just two humans acknowledging each other's existence. "You don't have to do this, you know," Mr. James had told her once. "I'm just the cleaning guy." "You're not just anything," Sarah had replied firmly. "You work hard. You deserve respect like anyone else." It wasn't virtue signaling or performative kindness. Sarah had been raised by parents who taught her that every job had dignity, that every person mattered regardless of their title or salary. She treated the janitor the same way she treated the CEO, with basic human decency. She had no idea that this simple principle was about to change her life forever. Sterling and Associates was the kind of advertising firm that looked perfect on the surface. Glass walls, modern furniture, exposed brick that screamed creative. They'd won awards. They had celebrity clients. They threw legendary holiday parties. But beneath the polished exterior, the culture was brutal. Sarah had been working there for 3 years as a marketing coordinator. She was good at her job. Great, actually. She had innovative ideas. She worked hard. And clients liked her. But in a company that valued prestige over performance, being competent wasn't enough. Her boss, Martin Whitmore, was a 42-year-old executive who'd climbed the ladder through a combination of ruthless ambition and strategic backstabbing. He wore $1,000 suits and made sure everyone knew it. He name-dropped constantly. He treated assistants like servants and spoke to anyone he considered beneath him with open contempt. The firm operated on a strict hierarchy. Partners at the top, senior executives below them, then managers, then coordinators like Sarah, then assistants and interns. And somewhere at the very bottom, invisible and ignored, were the people who kept the building running. Security guards, maintenance workers, cleaning staff. Martin made it clear what he thought of that last group. He'd snap his fingers at the barista in the building cafe. He'd complain loudly if the bathroom wasn't clean to his standards. He'd walk past Mr. James a dozen times a day without a glance. The culture flowed from the top down. Most employees adopted the same attitude. Not necessarily cruel, but indifferent. They simply didn't see the service workers as people worth noticing. But she was just a coordinator. What could she do? Then came the morning that forced her to make a choice. The conference room on the 8th floor had glass walls that looked out over the main workspace. It was designed to be impressive, to make clients feel like they were at the center of something important. That Tuesday morning, Martin had called a meeting for the entire marketing team. 15 people filed in, taking seats around the long table. Sarah sat near the middle, her notebook ready, trying to look alert despite having stayed up until 2 in the morning working on a campaign pitch. Mr. James was there too, quietly emptying the trash cans and wiping down the glass walls. He worked efficiently, trying to be unobtrusive. Sarah caught his eye and gave him a small smile. He nodded back. Martin swept in 10 minutes late, his phone pressed to his ear, his face already twisted with irritation. He was in the middle of what sounded like an argument with someone. Everyone at the table fell silent, waiting. He ended the call with an aggressive jab at his screen and threw himself into the chair at the head of the table. That's when he noticed Mr. James. "Are you serious right now?" Martin's voice was sharp and loud. "We're trying to have a meeting here." Mr. James looked up from the trash can he was emptying. "I'm almost finished, sir. Just one more. I don't care what you're doing. You're in the way. Don't you people have any awareness?" The temperature in the room dropped. Everyone shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one said anything. Mr. James straightened up, holding the trash bag. "I apologize. I'll come back later." "Yeah, you do that," Martin sneered. "And maybe learn to recognize when you're not wanted. The help should know their place and stay invisible." The words hung in the air like poison. Mr. James's face remained neutral, but Sarah saw the slight tightening around his eyes. Humiliation, controlled and suppressed. He'd heard this kind of thing before, probably 1,000 times. He turned to leave, dignified even in dismissal. And that's when Sarah couldn't stay silent anymore. "That's completely inappropriate." Sarah's voice cut through the uncomfortable silence. She hadn't planned to speak. The words came out before she could think about the consequences. Every head in the room turned to look at her. Martin's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? What you just said to Mr. James, it was disrespectful and completely inappropriate. He was doing his job. You don't get to talk to people like that." She could feel her colleagues staring. Some looked shocked. Others looked away quickly, as if they could avoid being associated with her rebellion. Martin leaned back in his chair, a dangerous smile playing at his lips. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't realize you were the HR department now. Or maybe you're confused about who works for whom here." "I'm not confused about basic human decency," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. James works just as hard as anyone in this room. He deserves to be treated with respect, not spoken to like he's less than human." Mr. James had stopped near the door. He stood very still, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. Martin's smile vanished. "You know what, Sarah? Maybe you're in the wrong line of work. Maybe you should be cleaning floors too if you relate so much to the help. I'm sure we can arrange a career change for you." The threat was clear. "Challenge me, and I'll destroy your career." Sarah felt the fear rise in her chest. She needed this job. She had student loans, rent in one of the most expensive cities in the world, responsibilities. Speaking up could cost her everything. But looking at Mr. James, at the quiet dignity in his posture, at the way he'd absorbed Martin's cruelty without defending himself because he couldn't afford to lose his job either, Sarah made her choice. "Say whatever you want about me," she said quietly, "but apologize to him." The room held its breath. Martin stood up slowly. "Get out." Sarah gathered her things with shaking hands and walked out of the conference room. Mr. James had already disappeared. The rest of the team stayed seated, eyes downcast, silent. Within an hour, everyone in the office knew what had happened. Sarah became a pariah overnight. Colleagues who'd been friendly before suddenly had no time to talk to her. Her invitations to meetings mysteriously stopped arriving. Martin made sure she was assigned to the worst projects, the impossible deadlines, the clients no one else wanted. She was being frozen out, systematically and deliberately. It was a clear message. This is what happens when you step out of line. Some co-workers whispered about her in the break room. "Career suicide," she heard someone say. "She'll be fired by the end of the month." A few looked at her with something like sympathy, but no one was willing to risk their own position by associating with her. That's how the culture worked. Protect yourself. Don't make waves. Look the other way. Sarah felt the isolation keenly, but when she lay awake at night replaying the confrontation, she still didn't regret it. 2 days after the incident, Mr. James approached her in the hallway near the elevators. The floor was mostly empty. It was early before most people arrived. "Miss Chen," he said quietly, "I wanted to thank ya out for what you did." Sarah shook her head. "You don't need to thank me. You didn't deserve to be treated that way." "Not many people see me as human," he said. Most look right through me like I'm furniture. You've always been different. That takes real character. Everyone deserves respect, Sarah said simply. Job titles don't change that. Mr. James smiled, a small, knowing smile that Sarah didn't quite understand. You're absolutely right, he said. They don't. The following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the conference room incident, an email went out to the entire company. Subject: mandatory all-staff meeting Tuesday, 2:00 p.m. All employees are required to attend. No exceptions. The email was from the CEO's office, which was unusual. The CEO, Richard Sterling, rarely involved himself in day-to-day operations. This had to be big. Speculation spread through the office like wildfire. I heard we're being acquired, someone said in the break room. No, I heard there's a new major investor, another person countered. I heard there are going to be massive layoffs, whispered an assistant, her face pale. Sarah sat at her desk trying to focus on work, but feeling a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She'd been at the company for 3 years, but after her confrontation with Martin, she had to be on the chopping block. New investor meant restructuring, meant getting rid of problem employees. She'd probably be the first to go. Martin, on the other hand, seemed nervous but was putting on a show of confidence. He strutted around the office, talking loudly about exciting new opportunities and strategic partnerships. But Sarah noticed him checking his phone compulsively and saw the tightness around his jaw. By 2:00, the entire staff had crammed into the largest conference room. People stood along the walls when the chairs ran out. The energy was tense, uncertain. Richard Sterling stood at the front, looking uncomfortable. Next to him was a woman Sarah didn't recognize, probably a lawyer or consultant. Thank you all for coming, Richard began. As you know, Sterling and Associates has been in discussions with a potential investor. This person has been conducting due diligence on our company for the past several months. He paused, glancing at the door. I'd like to introduce you to that investor now. The door opened, and Mr. James walked in. But he wasn't Mr. James anymore. The man who entered the conference room wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. His posture was different, confident, commanding. His eyes swept the room with the assurance of someone used to being in charge. The cleaning cart was gone. The janitor's uniform was gone. In their place was a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of Forbes. The room erupted in confused whispers. People looked around, trying to understand what they were seeing. Sarah's mouth fell open. She couldn't process what was happening. The man they'd known as the janitor walked to the front of the room and stood next to Richard Sterling. When he spoke, his voice had the same quiet quality Sarah remembered, but now it carried unmistakable authority. Good afternoon. My name is James Morrison. Some of you know me as the janitor who's been cleaning this building for the past 6 months. The whispers grew louder. Sarah saw Martin's face go absolutely white. I'm also the founder and CEO of Morrison Holdings, James continued calmly. My company is worth approximately $4.2 billion. We invest in businesses across multiple sectors: technology, real estate, media, and advertising. The room went silent. Someone's phone clattered to the floor. James let that sink in for a moment before continuing. I don't invest in companies randomly. I invest in organizations that share my values. Values like integrity, innovation, and respect for all employees, not just the ones with impressive titles. He pulled out a small device from his pocket, a recording device. 6 months ago, I approached Mr. Sterling with an investment offer. Before committing $300 million to this firm, I wanted to understand the culture from the inside, so I went undercover. I worked as a janitor. I emptied your trash cans, cleaned your bathrooms, mopped your floors. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. Every interaction she'd had with Mr. James flashed through her mind. The coffee she'd brought him, the conversations, the morning she'd told him, everyone deserves respect. I've seen how this company operates when people think no one important is watching, James said. I've experienced firsthand how employees at different levels of the hierarchy are treated. He pressed a button on the recording device. Martin Whitmore's voice filled the room. Don't you people have any awareness? The help should know their place and stay invisible. Martin looked like he might throw up. James let the recording play through the entire confrontation. Martin's insults, the uncomfortable silence from everyone else, and then Sarah's voice clear and unwavering. "That's completely inappropriate. Mr. James works just as hard as anyone in this room. He deserves to be treated with respect." When the recording ended, the silence in the room was absolute. "I've recorded hundreds of interactions over the past 6 months," James said. "I've documented how service workers are treated, how decisions are made, how people behave when they think their actions don't matter." He turned to look directly at Martin. "Mr. Whitmore, you end everything I refuse to support with my capital. You're cruel, elitist, and you've created a culture where people are valued based on their title rather than their character. That's not a business model I can invest in." Martin tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. James turned to address the room. "In my 6 months here, exactly one person treated me like a human being. One person out of over 100 employees said good morning, asked about my day, brought me coffee, defended me when I was insulted." His eyes found Sarah in the crowd. Sarah Chen didn't know I was wealthy. She didn't know I could help her career. She stood up for me because it was the right thing to do, even when it put her own job at risk. That's the kind of character I look for. That's integrity. Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. People were staring at her now, their expressions ranging from shock to shame to envy. James turned back to Richard Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, I've made my decision. I'm withdrawing my investment offer from Sterling and Associates. I cannot in good conscience put $300 million into a company with this kind of culture." The room erupted. People started talking all at once. Richard Sterling's face went red, then pale. The financial implications were catastrophic. Everyone knew the company had been counting on that investment for expansion plans already in motion. James held up his hand for silence. "However," he said, "I am making an offer to one person in this room." He looked at Sarah. "Miss Chen, I'd like you to come work for Morrison Holdings. I'm launching a new marketing division focused on ethical business practices. I want you to lead it." Sarah couldn't speak. Her mind was reeling, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 10 minutes. James continued, his voice professional but warm. "The position comes with a salary of $275,000, equity in the company, and full benefits. More importantly, you'd be working in an environment that values character over credentials, where respect isn't optional. It's foundational." Sarah was currently making $68,000. This was life-changing money, but more than the money, it was validation, recognition that doing the right thing mattered. Sarah's voice cracked. "I accept. Thank you." James smiled, the same kind smile she'd seen a dozen times when he'd been pushing a cleaning cart. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll have my HR team reach out to you this week." Then he turned his attention back to the room. "Mr. Sterling, I recommend you take a hard look at your company culture. The person you should have promoted was the one you allowed to be marginalized. The executive you protected is the one who drove away a $300 million investment." Richard Sterling nodded numbly, clearly in shock. James's eyes swept across the leadership team seated at the front of the room. "As for the rest of you who witnessed cruelty and said nothing, who participated in a culture of disrespect, you should ask yourselves what kind of leaders you want to be." He picked up his briefcase. "Mr. Whitmore, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Several other personnel changes will be announced by Mr. Sterling this week." Martin finally found his voice. "You can't do this. I've been with this company for 8 years. You can't just—" "I'm not doing anything," James said calmly. "You did this to yourself. How you treat people when you think it doesn't matter shows exactly who you are. And who you are is not someone I'm willing to work with." Security guards appeared at the door. Martin was escorted out of the building in front of everyone he'd once lorded over. Sarah watched him go, feeling not triumph, but something quieter. Justice. Accountability. The meeting dissolved into chaos. People clustered in groups, whispering frantically. Sarah just sat there, trying to absorb the fact that her life had just completely changed. 3 months later, Sarah sat in her new office at Morrison Holdings. Real office, with a door and a window that looked out over Central Park. She led a team of 12 people, all of whom she'd personally hired based on character and competence. The work was challenging and meaningful. They were building marketing campaigns for companies that prioritized ethical practices, sustainability, and employee welfare. It was everything she'd hoped a career could be. Sterling and Associates had collapsed. Without the Morrison investment, the expansion plans had fallen apart. The company laid off 40% of its staff and was struggling to stay afloat. Richard Sterling had resigned. The firm was a shadow of its former self. Meanwhile, James Morrison's undercover story had gone viral. Business publications wrote case studies. Universities invited him to speak about ethical leadership. His message was simple. How you treat people when you think they don't matter reveals everything about who you really are. Sarah had learned that lesson years ago from her parents, but living it, actually standing up for it when it cost something, that had been the test. She hadn't defended a janitor knowing he was a billionaire. She defended a human being who deserved respect. That was the whole point. James had told her later, over coffee in his actual office, "I've met countless people who are kind to those who can help them. You were kind to someone you thought couldn't. That's rare. That's real." Sarah kept a photo on her desk from that first day at Morrison Hull. Dings. In it, she stood next to James, both of them smiling. Not CEO and employee, just two people who believe that everyone matters, because they do.